Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we continue our off-season previews here on the channel. This one focusing in on the Portland Trailblazers, who I believe have flown a little bit under the radar. The mainstream media, national media does not show nearly as much love and attention to this Blazers team as they deserve. They had a pretty fun regular season. Of course, a lot of accomplishments for some of their individual players. Shout out to Toumani Camara, one of my favorite players in the league to watch. And if you're a Portland Trailblazers fan, first of all, shout out to you. And I hope you guys do enjoy the content today. If you do, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you are new to Utility Sports, hopefully you enjoy this kind of content and breakdown today. And let's get into exactly what we're going to cover for these Blazers and this offseason preview video. We're going to take a look at the 2024-2025 season with a quick little recap. I think that's the best place to start. You need to have a good idea of where this team is at currently. What is the most recent news and current iteration of this team look like? From there, we'll look at the NBA draft. Of course, the Blazers hold pick number 11 in this year's draft, which I think is a very valuable asset. There are some really good prospects that could still be on the board at pick number 11 this year that I think could be long-term pieces for Portland to consider. So we'll look at those draft prospects. We'll also consider Portland's free agency situation. They do have a bit of flexibility this offseason. And then I want to spend quite a bit of time actually discussing trade possibilities. I think Portland, this is one of the areas where they have flown completely under the radar as a team that I think is actually very well equipped to make a bigger trade. Now, would they push their chips in for someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo? That's probably not the most likely, but we will talk about some maybe budget star acquisitions that the Blazers could look at, or even lesser than that, maybe some cheaper contracts kind of in that $8 to $12 million range, guys who could be nice little pieces in their rotation moving forward. The Blazers are very well equipped, and we'll talk about that later in this video. And then we'll conclude with an early outlook for next season. Of course, a lot can still change, but it is a preemptive kind of idea on how good this team could be going into this next NBA season. So, starting with the season recap, the Blazers finished with a 36-46 record. I think the biggest highlight for them on the year was building a pretty good team defense, kind of right in the middle of the pack in the NBA in terms of defensive rating and allowing opponents to fewer points per game than they did a year ago. The defense was much improved year over year, and I think especially for a Chauncey Billups coach team, that was the entire idea of hiring him. And with that turnaround over the last couple of years, ultimately culminating in a pretty solid team defense this year, Chauncey Billups is here to stay for a while. Now, I think that's kind of a split decision right now between some Blazers fans. I think some are all in on the Chauncey Billups experience, and others I think are a little hesitant about him as the long-term head coach. I want to know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about Chauncey Billups. Do you think he's doing a great job? Do you think he's performing as adequately as he can with the talent that he had specifically? And what's your thoughts? Joe Cronin's also there to stay, finished 12th in the West this past season, and I think one of the big things that Joe Cronin did really well was identifying Deni Avdija as a trade target. They traded last year's 14th overall pick, which became Bub Carrington, to Washington in order to land Deni Avdija. Of course, there was a future draft pick involved in that deal as well, but with the way that that deal was structured, it can't be the first overall pick because they did the second most favorable of a three-team swap, which is extremely smart work in that kind of trade because while it could still be a solid pick, maybe even a lottery pick, there's no way it would be a top pick because of how it is structured. So Portland, I think, has really positioned themselves well. Avdija had a great season, averaged over 16 points, looking at a 7 rebound per game guy, 4+ assists per game guy moving forward. This is a very talented wing with playmaking talent, a true point forward, honestly, something that is very rare in today's league. It's either you're going to have a star forward or you're kind of finding more connective wing pieces, and I think Deni Avdija is more of that true point forward, comfortable really handling the ball, pick and roll. You go back to his Maccabi Tel Aviv tape, where he was doing that a few years ago before Washington drafted him. And I thought Portland gave him kind of that runway to showcase his talent a bit more, flash some triple-doubles, and had a really good season, all things considered. Talking about really good seasons, Toumani Camara, as a Dayton Flyer fan myself, I love this guy. This guy's putting on for my university that I like to cheer for, and Kamara's had a very, very good start to his young NBA career. Of course, they acquired him via Phoenix in that 3-team trade that brought him over from the Suns in the kind of convoluted Ayton, Damian Lillard, all the pieces, all the picks, all the stuff. Kamara was a throw-in into that and has actually worked out extremely, extremely well and has been a very smart, targeted piece for Portland to bring back over in that deal. I really like what he's given them so far. Shot the ball really well from three. That was one of the big developments for him this season, and I'm hoping he can continue with that shooting stability moving forward. Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot Henderson, two really young guys yet that I think are still core integral pieces long-term for Portland. Both of them very capable of playing off the bounce. Of course, Shaedon Sharpe, scoring numbers are there. He was very potent as a scorer in terms of the overall volume of scoring this year. I still think you can trend upward in the efficiency, but Shaedon Sharpe's one of the most athletic players in the league. At one point earlier in the year, he had the 3 highest vertical dunks on the season, and it comes back to what my evaluation was on him coming out of high school, and that kind of half season he spent at Kentucky where he didn't play in any games, but he was with the University of Kentucky. And you're watching him and you say, wow, this guy has some really elite athletic traits. And I think the Blazers are still working on uncovering the actual skill set behind everything there. But if you're a Blazers fan, you definitely still have to be excited. And then Scoot Henderson, I know there's not a lot of buzz and love going around for him. I'm holding on to that stock because I do think Henderson in general is a good long-term player still in this league. I'm holding on to all of my stock. I thought had a very good upgraded season in his sophomore campaign. I think moving forward, year 3, year 4 is really going to be the runway for him to take meaningful strides. It sounds like Portland's all in on committing to his development. There's rumors about Chris Paul, which we'll talk about later, but Scoot, I think, is still going to be the point guard of the future for the Blazers. Maybe it just has taken an extra year or two, but I don't think that's super shocking with how guards typically develop in the NBA outside of the generational ones, like a Luka Doncic, for example. Then you get Donovan Clingan, the 2-time national champion big man for UConn. You saw how important he was to the Huskies. Without him there, that Huskies team looked nowhere near national championship caliber. And Donovan Clingan had a really great rookie season. I know he didn't get maybe the honors, all rookie voting that he deserved. Didn't get Rookie of the Year finalist votes or anything like that crazy. But Clingan was so impactful when he was on the court. The block rate was incredulous. Actually, I believe had the second highest block rate in the NBA just behind Victor Wembanyama this past season. And this is a player who could be competing for future Defensive Players of the Year. It's all about rim deterrence and rim protection. And with his size and deep drop and how comfortable he is playing in that, you're going to force teams into a lot of mid-range jump shots. And I think one of my favorite things about Portland, with the Toumani Camara piece, kind of factoring that in already, you have an elite point of attack defender in place in Camara, and a guy who also has the physical tools to make recovery blocks and just fill in a lot of areas. And then Clingan taking away the rim. Those two guys, I think, are a very good build-around defensive identity moving forward. And if the Blazers can continue improving on that end of the floor, this is a very, very strong defensive identity moving into the next half-decade or so of Blazers basketball. You have a couple of veterans here to talk about too. Anthony Simons going into the final year of his contract. Jeremy Grant still has a lot of years left on his deal, 3 to be exact. And then DeAndre Ayton going into the final year of his contract. They all had solid seasons. They score the ball. I think one thing you look at Portland's scoring this year, and it was pretty equal balanced offense in terms of who was getting shooting opportunities, who was putting the ball in the hoop. They didn't have any 25 plus per game scorers, but they had a whole bunch of guys in that kind of 13 to 17 point per game range. And I think that's an interesting disposition this roster is at, where they maybe don't have the guy right now, but they have a collection of players who are capable of scoring. How do they go about balancing that? How do they go about looking to make trades? Anthony Simons, I do think, could be on the block this offseason. In today's video, we'll talk about some trade frameworks for the Blazers to make improvements, but there is always the possibility of them just trading Anthony Simons out for salary, maybe sending him to a team like Orlando, who has picks 16 and 25 in this draft, which could be interesting. They always have that flexibility, right? But they have gotten pretty solid play out of some of these players as well as veterans. I myself am extremely low on Jeremy Grant, just admittedly, but they have him under contract. They're going to play him, and he plays okay. He's solid. Moving into the NBA draft portion of this video, they have pick 11. That is their only pick so far on draft night. And here are some targets I like for them. Derek Queen out of Maryland, I think, would be a very fun fit with Donovan Clingan. One of Clingan's greatest attributes, again, is that rim protection and size around the rim and the ability to shut off the paint. And Derek Queen is one of the few rare bigs who actually showcased a lot in college about being able to defend out on the perimeter, being able to challenge jump shots, being able to move out in space a little bit. Had a pretty solid combination of steal and block rate. And while he's not an elite defender prospect, definitely isn't, he comes with some really, really tantalizing offensive skills that I think would be able to weaponize Donovan Clingan's size and rim gravity offensively as a lob catcher quite well. You would have a very dynamic 45 action with Queen handling the basketball and Clingan setting him screens up at the top of the key. It's definitely an avenue that I would consider strongly if I was Portland, especially since I'm so high on Derek Queen as an individual prospect. But then you can go the defensive route. Maybe someone like Carter Bryant out of Arizona or Noah Asenge out of Ratio Farm Ulm. Both very good athletes. Carter Bryant, a very elite physical athlete when it comes to his size, frame, strength, and leaping ability. Finishes at the rim extremely well. I think this would be a very productive cutter off of Donovan Clingan out of delay action and could be a very good 3-and-D forward in the league for a long time. And then Asenge, a little bit more of a special athlete. Not your typical big bruising power forward by any stretch, but he's very thin, fluid, agile out on the perimeter, moves his feet extremely well, has some unique play finishing skills that I think have been really flashing in the Euro Cup playoffs at the time I'm recording this. So all things considered here, Asenge, Carter Bryant, both could be very interesting defensive pieces who could have some of those play finishing tools off of Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp and off of Donovan Clingan off the top of the key as well. Then you look at two, I would say, players who are going to be touted as lower ceiling guys in Con Knippel and Kasparas Jakučionis. Knippel is going to get labeled as just a shooter. Now, I don't think he'll actually be available at pick number 11 for Portland. He'll probably go off the board in the top 8, maybe even top 6 or 7 in the draft this year. But Knippel would be such a tremendous target for them because of his play finishing tools, the functionality he could provide into an offense. Of course, his movement shooting is irreplaceable and would be extremely valuable for a team like Portland, who I just think needs more offensive juice in general. And then Kasparas Jakučionis. This would be maybe not the biggest vote of confidence in Scoot Henderson if you do draft Jakučionis, who is a 6'6" point guard, but he does have some real value off the ball as well, and I think that would be something in Portland that you could uncover a lot playing off of Clingan. You notice how central Clingan is to my long-term philosophy here for Portland and their team building. The selection of him last year in the top 10 was just brilliant. I thought that was a real home run pick for the Blazers last season as not only a defensive infrastructural piece for them moving forward, but also a key identity piece offensively as someone who is a very good playmaking hub, and I think we're starting to just barely see the surface of that get scratched from his rookie season. I think there's so much for him to grow and improve at yet. And I think with guys like Carter Bryant, Asenge, who has cutters out of the corner, or someone like Jakučionis, who moves with so much zeal without the ball in his hands, I think that would be a very impressive fit. Knippel as a movement shooter could really fit well off of Clingan off-ball screens. We've seen that story before with Jordan Hawkins at UConn. Otherwise, you could look at Derek Queen and build this really unique front court with a lot of skill, size, rim protection, and a big in Queen who can move his feet quite well. It really is the kind of era the NBA is in. Skilled size is always going to be prevalent. It's always going to be essential to have. And Portland, if they do go with Queen, could have that alongside another really huge Goliath human being in Donovan Clingan as their defensive anchor. So outside of the draft, what could this team still look to accomplish in free agency? Well, it is a little tricky for them. It's not the most obvious pathway to getting way better. They have a minimum of $170.563 million of money committed to their roster. That is factoring in Matisse Thybulle, who will definitely opt in to that $11.55 million player option. Now, of course, they could trade salary. They could try and dump it somewhere. Brooklyn could be a team with cap space this offseason. So it's possible that Portland could open up a little bit of flexibility one way or another, but they are a little bit over the cap right now as it currently is slated. They have about $25 million of cap holds as well on their roster. They have a couple of younger players hitting free agency. Delano Banton's hitting unrestricted free agency. I'm not sure if he's going to be a huge sticking point for Portland, but definitely could be a guy they look to keep around. And then Jabari Walker entering restricted free agency. I could see him signing for a relatively cheap long-term deal, which would be a nice cost-controlled depth piece for Portland moving forward. I know Blazers fans do like Jabari Walker quite a bit. I'm not necessarily sold that he's an integral long-term piece, but definitely someone that they could look to keep in the organization. And it really comes down to with their overall money committed. Then if you factor in Jabari Walker, for example, they're probably somewhere between $171 to $173 million in committed salary. Now, it depends on what the contracts actually look like. Of course, there is some flexibility, maneuverability there. But they are roughly about $17 million below the tax, which gives them access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is a pretty sizable chunk of change. They could split that up between two players, or they could use it to just win the battle for one specific player if they're promising him minutes and promising him a role and a pretty good chunk of change out of that non-taxpayer mid-level. It's a good way to get somebody in free agency even when you don't have legitimate cap space. And they do have some space until the first apron. So even if they go out and spend $12+ million on a non-tax mid-level player, they could still have some space between where they currently are and the first apron, which I think is an important note. Coming up to the trade deadline, it would give them extra flexibility. It would put them in a spot where not only are they really safe from the tax yet, they could have a little bit of maneuverability there, but if things are going really well, if things just click and they start winning a bunch, maybe they could be aggressive as buyers. Not necessarily saying that that's what I expect to happen, but knowing where they're at within relation to the tax and the apron is very important. So when it comes to who those free agent targets could be with that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, Quentin Grimes, of course, is a hot button name to watch for. Had such a strong end of the season with Philadelphia while that team was dealing with a slew of injuries. Quentin Grimes, I think, if you really want to know what his value is going to be for a team, though, I think you turn back on the tape to what he was doing at the beginning of this year for Dallas and what he was doing a few seasons ago for the New York Knicks, which is a kind of 3-and-D guard player who had some real impact and real value, was shooting the ball really, really well for Dallas before he was traded at the deadline. Pretty inexplicably, in my opinion, in the trade for Caleb Martin. I think Quentin Grimes would be a really great fit for a team like Portland, especially if they do decide to move off of someone like Anthony Simons or open up some minutes in their backcourt one way or another. Quentin Grimes, I think, would be a very good piece alongside of Scoot Henderson. Otherwise, you look at someone who's going to be highly coveted in free agency as well, Nickeil Alexander-Walker of the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Wolves are dealing with a little bit of a cap crunch right now. Julius Randle has a player option. Naz Reid has a player option. I think the Wolves will prioritize Naz over Nickeil pretty significantly, especially with Terrence Shannon Jr. there in place as the long-term backup option probably behind Na, which makes Nickeil very likely to be gone. And I think Portland would be a very strong landing spot for him. Nickeil has some really good playmaking tools in terms of his connectivity, his ambidexterity as a passer. He's a really, really good corner three-point shooter. He's got one of the better escape dribbles in the NBA when it comes to hard closeouts. Guy runs by him. He's going to take a quick little escape dribble to the left and reset himself, and he's going to shoot that ball pretty well off of those. Chris Paul, of course, was a player who was rumored as a potential target for Portland. I would really love Chris Paul as a mentor here for the Blazers. Not only could he play 15 to 20 minutes a game and have a positive impact like he always has, he actually led the Spurs in win shares this past season, but for Portland specifically, we've seen his impact around other guards in the past. You think about where Phoenix was before they acquired him. Then they made a run to the NBA Finals, and Devin Booker kind of took another huge step forward in his game, having a floor general next to him in Chris Paul. Then you look at, of course, his impact in his lone season with OKC, kind of functioning as that starting point guard, helping bring Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and his development along. I just feel like a lot of young players have really blossomed post Chris Paul, after playing with him for a little bit, after learning from him, seeing his habits, and seeing the way that he works on the court. They just end up being better afterward. And it's not a mistake. It's not a coincidence. And I do think for Scoot Henderson specifically, there would be a lot for him to learn from Chris Paul in that locker room, on the court, watching him in practice, being around him all the time, on the team playing, all this kind of stuff, film study. I just do think there's a lot of small value that you can extract from this, a signing like this. So if the Blazers did go out and give a pretty sizable contract to Chris Paul, I wouldn't even be mad at it, because I do think it would return pretty good value for them long-term, just from a mentorship standpoint. Santi Aldama, he's a restricted free agent. I do think Memphis will try really hard to keep him. Part of that was dumping Marcus Smart at the trade deadline in the way that they did, giving up their first-round pick to do so. Santi Aldama is definitely a player who is going to have some real value around the league. There's just not a lot of forwards who are as big and long as he is, while still having that fluidity as well. And then you look at Dennis Schroeder. I think Schroeder specifically, another guy who is a really good third guard to have in the backcourt. You saw for Detroit how valuable he was earlier in the season for Brooklyn. Of course, kind of had a tumultuous season in terms of how many times he was traded. Got traded from Brooklyn to Golden State, then traded from Golden State to Detroit, was traded last trade deadline as well the year prior. So Schroeder's been on the move a bit. He might just be looking to stay in Detroit, all things considered, to keep his home there and to stop moving so much. But Portland definitely would be a good landing spot for him if they maybe strike out on Chris Paul, if the Mavericks pay for him, or if someone goes with the Chris Paul route. There is some backup options, and I think Schroeder would be perhaps one of them for the Blazers. Let's talk about the trade possibilities, and I think this is one of the most important points of the entire video, and one that I want you guys to hear me, understand what I'm trying to say, because I'm not saying that the Blazers necessarily need to go make a big splash trade for a star. I'm not saying that I fully expect them to. What I'm saying is they have the ability to, and there's a big difference there, right? A team like Houston this offseason, I think, is much more in a position that they should really go and pursue that. I think Portland's kind of in a sneaky spot where they really could be an under-the-radar team to strike big time. And the reason for that is they have a bunch of expiring contracts, 4 of them that are very notable. They have DeAndre Ayton's expiring $35.55 million contract. They have Anthony Simons' $27.7 million expiring contract. Those two together are massive. That is $62 million in expiring salary just between those two guys. But then you also look at some of their mid-sized expiring salaries. Robert Williams, a guy who's been perennially on the trade block since they got him from Boston. That $13.3 million salary, definitely movable as an expiring contract, even though he hasn't played many games for Portland. And then Matisse Thybulle, another guy who's dealt with some injuries. He's a very good defensive player when he's on the court, though. $11.5 million is definitely movable. I could see teams either looking at him as a very cheap acquisition if they're trying to include him into their rotation as kind of an 8th or 9th guy, or flat out, it's a way to get off of money for another team. And that flexibility, especially in this new NBA with the CBA being as restrictive as it is really strong for Portland. And then they have draft capital to work with these contracts. They have pick number 11 in this draft, which is a pretty strong starting point for trade value. They have the Bucks first round picks in 2028 through 2030, whether they're swap options or just flat out an unprotected pick via Milwaukee. Again, extremely valuable assets to have. They have their own tradable first, so they do right now still have trade restrictions because of the step-in rule on their own first-round picks for the most part. Now, they have a little bit of flexibility because of those Bucks assets, but it's something that is going to require a little bit of nuance, so I don't think Portland's going to look to trade anything of their own between now and 2028 because of the protection backups that they have in that. So then 2029 they technically could include, but probably wouldn't, which makes 2030 to 2032 the picks to watch for. And then they have the 8 tradable second round picks between the 2026 draft and the 2031 draft, which gives them real firepower to go out and get any kind of player they want. And, you know, Milwaukee having some of those Bucks swaps and Bucks assets isn't bad to have if it comes down to a Giannis trade. Just saying. Now, do I think Portland trades for Giannis? Probably not. But they have assets to get involved if they want to. And they have young players to add in too. A couple guys who I think are more than expendable for Portland in Chris Murray and Ryan Rupert that I could see some teams being like, hey, they're young players, we'll take them. You know, Chris Murray, former first round pick. Ryan Rupert was a guy I know some teams had in the top 35, 40 on their boards. So it would definitely be interesting to see if a team would pull one of those two guys or maybe both of them in a deal. So let's look at some of those trade frameworks. And bringing stars to Portland, I think there's some intriguing options. And my favorite one is Domantas Sabonis to the Blazers. Of course, his father, Arvydas Sabonis, had such a legendary career when he came over to the NBA, ultimately at an older age. And getting Domantas in Portland, it just feels right. Bringing Sabonis to the Pacific Northwest, playing with the Blazers, I just think would be a very good feel-good story. And I do think it actually makes some really legitimate basketball sense as well. You think about Klingon playing off the top of the key. Well, having him learn from Domantas Sabonis could be really good. Sabonis, of course, way more lively with his handle than Klingon is at this point, and a lot more decisive and dynamic with the ball in his hands. But I do think the similarities between them as DHO hubs and playmakers off the top of the key would give Portland some really good consistency with 48 minutes of very strong center play. You could maybe even experiment a little bit and play Sabonis with Klingon. Now, I do think your spacing would be pretty rough with that, but we've seen some of the bigger teams in the league, like Houston playing 2 bigs. You see, of course, OKC playing 2 bigs who are very dynamic off of each other. Like that works extremely well in the NBA, especially in the regular season. So Portland, this could be a really good opportunity for them to improve their roster pretty significantly right now. And it's not costing you a ridiculous amount either. It costs you DeAndre Ayton. It costs you a couple of those young guys in Chris Murray, Ryan Rupert. For the Kings, this is getting not only short-term cap relief, you save almost $3 million in your budget this season, but you're also saving a lot of long-term money. Sabonis has his big extension number, Ayton's an expiring contract. In this as well, Sacramento gets pick number 11 and 3 future second-round picks. I think with Sabonis' contract, the market is going to be rather limited. So for Sacramento, you can sell your fan base on getting the former number 1 overall pick, DeAndre Ayton, getting another pick in the lottery in this year's draft, a couple of young guys, and more second-round draft capital to continue your flexibility. Of course, Sacramento got a few first-round picks and 5 second-round picks for De'Aaron Fox at the trade deadline. So the Kings would be working with a pretty significant pick advantage moving forward, and giving them pick 11 in this draft would give them a lottery pick to boot as well. I think it's an interesting trade framework, not one that probably actually goes down, but I wanted to discuss some buy low options for Portland. And another one that stands out to me is LaMelo Ball. Could LaMelo Ball be a core target for the Blazers this offseason? Of course, I don't really think he actually gets traded from Charlotte, but if he were to, a 2028 swap right with Milwaukee, pick number 11, Chris Murray, and DeAndre Ayton's expiring salary for LaMelo Ball, I think is a mortgageable amount of money. And the reason I wanted to talk about LaMelo specifically for Portland, remember, assistant GM Mike Schmitz was one of the biggest believers in LaMelo Ball in his draft class. Went over to Australia when LaMelo was playing in the NBL and touted him as a top 3 prospect before anyone else really was. And I think that at that point in time really solidified a lot of LaMelo Ball's stock and how people felt about him. And I think for the Blazers, if Mike Schmitz and Joe Cronin there have an opportunity to land LaMelo Ball, I think it would be hard to pass up on that pedigree. And the one thing Portland has that Charlotte just does not have around him is a defensive infrastructure that could really protect him. The Blazers would have a very sizey lineup. They have, of course, a lot of athleticism with Kamara and Sharp. You have a great big man who can be an elite screener in Donovan Clingan. There's a lot that can make LaMelo Ball really tick there in Portland, and I think the efficiency would go up, the assist numbers would go up, and the winning would go way up for him in Portland compared to where it's been in Charlotte the last few years. I think if you have competitive, competent players around LaMelo Ball with a good head coach, you can definitely win a lot of games in the NBA, and I think LaMelo, having his career somewhat salvaged in Portland, would be a very good feel-good story, especially with Mike Schmitz and his existence there and kind of the relationship those two had from LaMelo Ball's draft class the year that he came out from the NBL. Moving on to trade framework number 3, and specifically, this one probably not going to happen, but Ja Morant. This is another buy low candidate for Portland. Anthony Simons would be in this deal to Memphis, giving them another scoring, shooting point guard. Chris Murray, Ryan Rupert, they're involved, and pick number 11. So I think all things considered, very, very small amount of assets going out the door for Portland. While yes, it does cost you pick 11, is pick 11 and Anthony Simons worth the upgrade to Ja Morant? I definitely think so. A change of direction, change of scenery for Ja Morant might be really good for him at this point of his career. I think Portland, again, they have that infrastructure. This is what makes me so excited about them as a potential kind of sneaky buy team this offseason. They have a lot of good young pieces. And if they kind of step on the gas at the right time with all of these expiring contracts, they can fit them into their cap table pretty well, pretty smoothly, and not even be a tax team yet. And I think that's one of the benefits here of making an aggressive trade. If you're Portland right now, you can get a lot better today without jeopardizing a lot of your long-term flexibility because of these expiring contracts and because of the upcoming draft, having pick number 11 as one of your premium assets. You know, you could either draft in the lottery in the back end of the lottery or get somewhat of an established kind of secondary star, if that's a Ja Morant or a Domantas Sabonis or a LaMelo Ball. And while it may not be the final touches for your team, and you might still need to figure something out elsewhere, whether it's Shaedon Sharp's development, more from Tamani Kamara, Donovan Clingan's ascension into a starting level player, whatever that is, I mean, Portland has a lot of leeway yet to grow and improve their team through patience, and I think that's the benefit here for Portland. They can make a buy now move without really jeopardizing too much of their long-term future. Of course, I'm not going to mention too much of Zion Williamson. I do think had the allegations not came out against him, he could have been a candidate for this, but with all of that noise going on right now, I just do not see an NBA team trading for him. So trade framework number 4, maybe it's not a star player. Maybe it's just a very good role player, something similar to what we saw last year where they traded for Denny Avdia, who's not a true quote-unquote star, but really stars in his role and is a very, very good player. And I think Cam Johnson could be another example of that now. He's a little bit older, maybe a little too old for Portland to really value trading for him at this point in time, but I do think he would make their team a whole lot better. And this is the type of trade where you're giving up 2 of those smaller expiring contracts, Robert Williams III, Matisse Thybulle. You're also saving a little bit of money, about $4 million here too, which gives you a little bit of extra space if you want to be a little bit more aggressive in some other moves. It does cost you pick 11, but in return you get Cam Johnson, you get picks 26 and 27 in the draft, so you still have 2 swings in the back end of the first round you could use. Gives Portland some flexibility and definitely drastically improves their roster big time, going from Thybulle and Robert Williams, who basically have been nothings for them the last couple of seasons, and improving that to Cam Johnson is just a very significant, notable upgrade to their team, and I think one that would have them moving in a very, very strong direction and just making them a whole lot better overall. Trade framework number 5. This is a smaller trade again. This has Matisse Thybulle and a couple of second-round picks going out to Chicago for Lonzo Ball. This is another example if Portland doesn't get Chris Paul, if they don't get Dennis Schroeder, maybe they settle on someone like Lonzo. Maybe they get a player who can function as a guard in a way, but he's not really a true point guard. He's kind of more of a connective guard. He can initiate some offense for you, but he's really good off the wing. This is a player you can play next to Scoot Henderson. There's a lot of lineup versatility that Lonzo Ball brings. It would also add to Portland's defensive core identity in a big way when Lonzo Ball is actually on the floor. I think this is a very risk-averse trade for both sides. Chicago gets some second-round draft capital and expiring money for Lonzo, and the Blazers get a guy who would significantly improve their rotation when he's actually on the floor. And if he doesn't stay on the floor too much, you're really not giving up too much. A couple second-round picks, Matisse Thybulle, that's definitely mortgageable in a trade for someone like Lonzo at this point in time. So when it comes to next season, what's a fair, realistic early outlook for this team? Probably somewhere to between 35 and 41 wins. Could I see them being around 500 next year? For sure. Now, it's going to depend on what else happens in the Western Conference. Of course, Dallas is going to be much better next season, we'd have to assume. You're also looking at Phoenix. Maybe they rewrite their team a little bit, change what their identity looks like. If they get a good return for Kevin Durant, their team could look a lot different. They could be much better next season. But anywhere from 35 to 41 wins, I think, is very realistic, just because this Portland team is going to continue improving. I think we'll see a little bit more Donovan Clingan. I want to see some more offensive growth from this team in general, playing through Clingan more. I want to see Scoot Henderson take another big step forward. And I think a big thing that could help bring that along as well and usher in that development is an increase in pace. I want to see them get out and run more. I want to see them, once they get on the defensive glass, use some of Clingan's outlet ability. Get out and run, get out in the wings, stretch the floor that way in terms of getting down deep into the corners, opening up the paint a little bit more for Scoot that way early in transition, hit more drag screens, do a lot more of that little stuff that I think could make their offense much better, and just playing a little bit more snappy, a little bit quicker could definitely bring in some more offensive efficiency. And I think their team defense is going to take another step forward. I think they could be a top 12, top 10-ish defense next season. Of course, the offseason will dictate a little bit what that's going to look like, because some teams might go out and drastically improve their team defenses. Maybe Portland makes a move that is a little bit of a sell move, even with an Anthony Simons trade that could perhaps improve their defense by getting rid of Simons, right? Like there's ways for Portland to still improve their defense as well compared to other teams in the league. So it's hard to give like an actual number ranking on what I would expect them to be next year defensively, but top 10 is not out of the realm of possibility by any stretch of the imagination for Portland. And if you're a Blazers fan, you got to be so excited because good team defense is fun to watch. The Blazers have that, and there's a lot of optimism going forward around Portland Trailblazer basketball. So if you're a Blazers fan, should be very, very ecstatic and happy. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.